My name is Clara Hayes, and I can still feel the way the air inside Vanessa's penthouse seemed to shimmer that night, heavy with perfume and the kind of laughter that makes you wonder if you are the punchline. The city glittered beneath her floor-to-ceiling windows as if it had dressed up just to honor her birthday, and I arrived clutching a small silver box that contained my grandmother's bracelet, an heirloom wrapped in velvet and quiet love. I had spent the afternoon polishing every link, remembering how Grandma used to say that real value lived in the stories we keep close, not the price tags people brag about. But the moment I stepped into that room, I felt the first crack of unease. Designer gowns swept past me, champagne flutes sparkled like liquid diamonds, and every corner of her party whispered money. Vanessa spotted me across the crowd, her smile a little too sharp, and beckoned me over to the gift table where glittering packages towered like a monument to excess. When it was time to open presents, she saved mine for last. Cameras tilted toward us, guests leaned in, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might actually appreciate something that carried heart instead of hype. She peeled back the paper, lifted the bracelet into the light, and tilted her head with a smirk that sliced through the music. "Oh, how vintage," she said, the words stretched thin with mockery. A ripple of awkward laughter followed, and someone near the bar muttered that it looked like a flea market find. Heat rushed to my cheeks as I forced a brittle smile, the weight of 100 eyes pressing into my skin. I wanted to explain the bracelet's history, to tell them it belonged to a woman whose love was richer than any bank account, but my throat locked tight. Vanessa draped the bracelet across her wrist with exaggerated delicacy and added, "Well, it's the thought that counts," before setting it aside like an afterthought. The crowd moved on, the music swelled, and yet the humiliation hung around me like smoke. I left before the cake was cut, slipping through the elevator doors while their laughter echoed behind me. Outside, the night air bit cold against my burning face, and I stared down at the city lights trembling below. In my palm, I still felt the phantom weight of the bracelet, its story, its mystery, the secret my grandmother once hinted at but never revealed. Vanessa thought she had measured its worth with a single cruel glance, but as I walked into the darkness, I made a silent vow. The bracelet carried more than memories. It carried numbers, records, maybe even a fortune waiting to be uncovered. And one day soon, those hidden numbers would speak for me in a language Vanessa could never mock. The morning after the party, I woke to a phone buzzing with notifications, each vibration like a tiny hammer against the bruise of last night's humiliation. At first, I thought it was just the usual chatter, group messages about the cake, photos of glittering champagne glasses, but as I scrolled, the sting sharpened. Screenshots of Vanessa holding my grandmother's bracelet were already making the rounds, her caption a dagger dressed as a joke. Some gifts are priceless, and some belong in a yard sale. Friends I'd known for years had added laughing emojis or coy comments that pretended neutrality while feeding the spectacle. It wasn't just one post. It was a chain reaction. Someone filmed the unwrapping and uploaded a slowed-down clip of her smirk, and by noon, the video had spread through our social circle like wildfire. Every ding of my phone felt like another whisper passing through a hallway I couldn't reach. I went silent, watching the tide of mockery build from the shadows of my bedroom, my curtains drawn tight against the bright morning. Yet beneath the ache of embarrassment, a stubborn spark flickered. Anger, yes, but also a gnawing curiosity. Vanessa's cruelty wasn't new, but something about her choice of words, cheap, yard sale, kept echoing against the memory I couldn't quite catch. My grandmother's voice surfaced in fragments, stories about a jeweler she once loved, a secret appraisal she never explained, the way her eyes twinkled when she warned, "Numbers live in the details, Clara." I found myself pulling the bracelet from its velvet box again and again, tilting it beneath the pale light leaking through my blinds, tracing the tiny engravings along the clasp. Late that night, restless and buzzing with questions, I dug through an old cedar chest where Grandma's letters and photographs lay bundled in faded ribbons. Dust rose in lazy spirals as I opened envelope after envelope until a brittle sheet of cream-colored stationery slid free. The handwriting was hers, delicate loops and careful slants, addressed to a name I didn't recognize. Martin & Co. Fine Appraisals. My breath caught. The letter was dated only a month before she passed away and referenced final valuation papers for item 47B. The bracelet, I realized with a sudden jolt. But the letter was incomplete, ending mid-sentence as if she had been interrupted. Clutched in the same bundle was a smaller envelope, sealed with wax and embossed with her initials. My pulse thundered as I held it to the lamp, the faint outline of folded documents visible within. I didn't dare break the seal, not yet. Instead, I sat in the quiet glow of the lamp, the city outside muffled to a distant hum, and felt the first rush of power replacing the humiliation. Vanessa's gossip was spreading fast, but what lay inside that envelope promised a truth stronger than every whisper combined. Somewhere in these papers was a number, a proof of worth that would one day choke every laugh she had set loose. The sealed envelope from my grandmother burned like a secret in the drawer for 2 restless nights before I finally gave in. I waited until the apartment was silent, the clock glowing past midnight, and then slid a fingernail beneath the wax. The soft crack of the seal sounded louder than it should have, like a door opening into another life. Inside lay a folded letter and a thin, yellowed receipt from a jeweler dated decades ago. My grandmother's handwriting danced across the page, elegant and deliberate. She described the bracelet not just as a keepsake, but as a heritage piece, crafted by a Parisian artisan who once designed for royalty and hidden away during a war. She wrote about a clandestine purchase made by my great-grandfather when fortunes were shifting and markets collapsing, a time when certain stones were worth more than the banks that housed them. My breath quickened as I read her final line. This bracelet carries the ledger of our family's perseverance. If ever questioned, know that true value waits beneath the surface. I turned the bracelet over in my palm, my thumb tracing the delicate filigree, and suddenly noticed what I had missed 100 times before, a nearly invisible pattern etched along the inner clasp. It wasn't decorative. It looked like a series of numbers and tiny symbols. Heart pounding, I fetched a magnifying glass from my desk drawer and held it beneath the lamp. There it was, clear as moonlight. A string of digits too precise to be random. Coordinates? A date? I copied them carefully onto a scrap of paper, my grandmother's words echoing in my head. Curiosity sharpened into determination. The next morning, I combed through her old photo albums and letters for more context. Buried between brittle photographs of Paris streets and a faded train ticket, I found a postcard from a jeweler's shop in Lyon with a barely legible signature, Henri Devereux. The name stirred a vague memory, perhaps one of those whispered family legends about a lost fortune. I carried the bracelet and the letter to the university library where I worked part-time, spending hours hunched over microfilm and digital archives. Each new discovery, an old newspaper clipping about Devereux's rare gemstone techniques, a record of wartime seizures and hidden caches, felt like stepping deeper into a labyrinth my grandmother had quietly designed for me to find. By evening, I was vibrating with the weight of revelation. The bracelet wasn't just antique. It was possibly one of the few surviving pieces from a collection thought to have vanished during the occupation of France. Its value wasn't measured in simple carats, but in history, rarity, and survival. I tucked the papers back into their envelope with trembling hands. Vanessa's taunts, once sharp as blasts, suddenly felt small and dull against the magnitude of what pulsed beneath the bracelet's surface. She had mocked a treasure whose story spanned continents and generations, and I knew in that moment that the real price of her cruelty would be paid in silence when the world learned the truth. By the time I finished tracing the bracelet's lineage through archives and forgotten letters, my small apartment felt like a war room. Photocopies, faded photographs, and scribbled notes covered the kitchen table like a map of hidden treasure, each scrap pointing toward a value far greater than any of Vanessa's glittering trinkets. But one name kept resurfacing: Martin & Co. Fine Appraisals, the same name from my grandmother's unfinished letter. Curiosity hardened into resolve. I dialed the number I found on a decades-old business card tucked behind an old photo, half expecting it to be disconnected. To my surprise, a polished voice answered, and within minutes, I had an appointment. The following morning, I tucked the bracelet into its velvet box and carried it downtown through the early chill, my breath forming nervous clouds in the air. The building that housed Martin & Co. was an elegant relic of the past. Marble columns, brass elevators, and walls lined with framed certificates dating back more than a century. A receptionist with a voice like soft velvet ushered me into a private office where a man in a tailored suit introduced himself as Mr. Caldwell, the firm's senior appraiser. His eyes sharpened at the instant they fell on the bracelet, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw a recognition flicker there, like he was greeting an old acquaintance rather than a piece of jewelry. He slipped on cotton gloves, examined the clasp under a jeweler's loupe, and paused when he noticed the hidden numbers I had copied down days earlier. "You've brought us something unusual," he said, the words carefully measured. He asked if I had any accompanying paperwork, and I handed over my grandmother's letter and the yellowed receipt. Caldwell scanned them, his brow tightening as he cross-referenced dates and signatures against a database on his computer. The screen reflected a shifting pattern of documents: auction records, insurance ledgers, wartime registries, before he leaned back, visibly intrigued. This piece was scheduled for a final valuation decades ago, but the process was interrupted. He explained in hushed tones that the bracelet's origins aligned with a series of European collections believed lost during the chaos of occupation, collections whose surviving pieces rarely surface without fanfare. When I asked what that meant in practical terms, he gave a diplomatic smile and said only, "Its value may exceed conventional appraisal metrics." He requested permission to conduct a full authentication, including gemological testing and provenance verification. My heart thudded as I signed the necessary forms, each stroke of the pen sealing a future Vanessa could never imagine. As I left the office, the sound of my signature still echoing in my ears, I felt the first true shift in power. The bracelet was no longer just a Hamley heirloom or a cruel party anecdote. It was a financial and historical force waiting to be unleashed. Vanessa's laughter might still be rippling through our social circles, but soon, when the numbers were finalized, the echo that followed would belong to me. 2 days later, I returned to Martin & Co. for the formal appraisal, my heart drumming a rhythm that seemed to sync with the elevator's ascent. The velvet box felt heavier than ever in my bag, as though the bracelet itself was aware that today its true story would finally surface. Mr. Caldwell greeted me in a quiet, glass-walled lab, where natural light spilled across white counters and trays of precision tools gleamed like surgical instruments. A second specialist joined us, a woman with steady hands and eyes that flickered with barely contained excitement. They spoke in low tones, using technical terms: spectrometer, refractive index, fluorescence testing, that sounded almost like a secret language. I stood a few feet away, every nerve alive, as they began their careful work. First came a gentle cleaning to remove decades of dust, followed by microscopic examination under an LED loupe. The woman traced the hidden numbers on the clasp with a fine-tipped stylus, nodding to Caldwell as if confirming a private suspicion. Next, they positioned the bracelet beneath a spectrometer, a machine that hummed softly as beams of light fractured across its surface, revealing mineral signatures I couldn't begin to interpret. Time blurred into a series of small, deliberate motions, the tightening of gloves, the quiet click of calibration, the scratch of a pen marking notes in an elegant ledger. Occasionally, they would exchange glances, sharp, knowing looks that tightened the knot in my stomach. At one point, Caldwell leaned toward the monitor, adjusted a dial, and released a breath that sounded almost like awe. "Remarkable," he whispered, unaware or perhaps unconcerned that I could hear. My mind raced with possibilities. A six-figure value? 7? Was it even safe for me to own something so rare? They moved on to provenance verification, pulling up digital archives that displayed faded auction catalogs and wartime shipping manifests. Each time the bracelet's description matched an entry on the screen, the tension in the room thickened. Finally, Caldwell stepped back, removing his gloves with slow precision. He regarded the bracelet as though it had transformed before his eyes. "This piece carries a pedigree we encounter maybe once in a lifetime," he said carefully. Its documented lineage, combined with the artisan's unique hallmark, places it in an echelon far beyond standard market valuation. My pulse thundered as his words settled into the air. I wanted to demand a number, a figure that would crush Vanessa's insult into dust. But Caldwell simply smiled, explaining that final calculations required cross-referencing with international databases. He promised an official report within 48 hours and assured me that the firm would handle the necessary security protocols. I left the building with my breath caught between exhilaration and dread, the city's afternoon light sharper and the street noises strangely distant. The bracelet, sealed now in a protective case, remained behind locked doors, but its power followed me out onto the bustling sidewalk. Somewhere, in a hidden database, numbers were arranging themselves into a truth so staggering it would rewrite everything Vanessa thought she knew about me and everything I thought I knew about my own worth. The call from Martin & Co. came precisely 48 hours later, crisp and businesslike, but the tremor in the receptionist's voice hinted at the magnitude behind her words. "Miss Hayes," she said, "your appraisal report is ready. Mr. Caldwell would like to deliver it in person." My chest tightened as I agreed to meet them that afternoon. The world outside my apartment blurred as I rolled the elevator down. Every floor seemed to stretch into eternity. By the time I reached the appraisal office, my palms were damp and my heart beat a steady drum against my ribs. Caldwell greeted me in the same glass-walled lab, now dimmed against the late-day sun, and gestured toward a sleek folder resting on the counter. "Before you read this," he said softly, "I want you to know that our team verified every document twice. There is no doubt." He slid the folder across the counter. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The first page bore a series of figures that made my breath catch, a total valuation so large it looked almost like a misprint, 4,780,000 USD. Beneath the bold type, detailed notes confirmed the bracelet's provenance, tracing it to a lost European royal collection believed destroyed during the Second World War. Caldwell explained that the hidden numbers etched inside the clasp were registry codes used to track pieces confiscated and later reclaimed by private families. "This is not simply a piece of jewelry," he said, his tone reverent. "It is a living artifact." The room seemed to contract around me. The air thickened until I could hear only the blood rushing in my ears. Vanessa's sneer replayed in my mind, every syllable of cheap dissolving beneath the weight of those numbers. I imagined her scrolling through social media tonight, unaware that the object she dismissed could buy and sell every designer bag she flaunted. Caldwell placed a discreet security envelope beside the report, containing high-resolution photographs, certification seals, and insurance recommendations. "You'll need to arrange armed transport if you decide to move it," he advised. I nodded, still half in a dream, the enormity of the valuation pressing against my ribs like a rising tide. When I finally stepped back onto the street, the city sounded different. Horns sharper, footsteps quicker, as if the universe itself had shifted. The bracelet, now secured within a climate-controlled vault, had become a silent weapon, a number so loud it required no words. I walked toward the setting sun with a strange calm blooming beneath my ribs, already picturing the look on Vanessa's face when she learned what she had mocked. The humiliation she had tried to carve into me was gone, replaced with a cold, exhilarating certainty. I no longer needed revenge to prove my worth. The numbers had already spoken, and their echo would reach her soon enough. The appraisal report burned in my bag like a silent trumpet, its weight more potent than any sharp reply I could have crafted. For 2 days I kept it close, replaying Vanessa's laugh until the memory hardened into resolve. If this bracelet was a living artifact, then its story deserved a stage as grand as the insult that sparked it. I began with quiet preparations, a meeting with a private security firm to arrange safe retrieval, consultations with a discreet PR contact from my university's arts department, and a carefully worded email to the board of a high-profile charity where Vanessa served as a co-chair. My plan was simple, elegant, and impossible for her to ignore. When the charity's spring gala arrived, I made sure Vanessa would be there, draped, as always, in borrowed sparkle and curated confidence. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and camera flashes as I arrived in a black silk gown, the velvet bracelet box tucked under my arm like a secret about to bloom. During the evening's silent auction, I approached the podium and offered a special donation item for live bidding. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as an attendant revealed the bracelet beneath a cascade of spotlights, its stones catching the light like captured stars. Gasps followed the auctioneer's introduction. An authenticated Devereaux heritage piece, appraised at nearly $5 million. I caught Vanessa's eyes across the room, wide, unblinking, her champagne flute frozen mid-air. For a delicious heartbeat, I said nothing, letting the revelation settle like a slow rolling storm. Cameras clicked, guests craned their necks, even the auctioneer paused to marvel at the certificate I had framed beside the bracelet. Then I stepped forward, my voice carrying clear and steady through the microphone. "This," I announced, "is the very bracelet that was once dismissed as worthless at a birthday party not long ago. Turns out, value has a way of revealing itself." The crowd erupted in startled laughter and admiring applause. Vanessa's cheeks flushed a shade darker than her lipstick, her smile stretched taut as silk. Bids surged higher and higher, though I had already arranged with the charity to retain ownership should I choose. The point was never to sell. It was to show. When the gavel finally fell, I reclaimed the bracelet and clasped it around my wrist, the applause rising like a tide of vindication. Vanessa approached afterward, her eyes searching mine for mercy or explanation, but I offered only a cool smile and the quiet grace of someone who no longer needs to gloat. "It's beautiful," she murmured, voice trembling. "It always was," I replied, turning toward the cameras that now followed my every move. In that moment, the bracelet wasn't just proof of wealth, it was a declaration that no one defines my worth but me. The humiliation Vanessa once wielded had transformed into a coronation, and the crown glittered on my wrist for the entire room to see. The days that followed the gala felt like living inside a quiet, luminous storm, one where the thunder was applause, and the lightning was a subtle shift in how people looked at me. Overnight, invitations to art exhibits, collector dinners, and interviews flooded my inbox. But beyond the attention, there was a deeper current I hadn't expected, a profound stillness inside me, like a door finally clicking shut. The bracelet, once a simple gift from my late grandmother, now rested in a secure glass case in my apartment, a reminder of love, legacy, and the unshakable truth that value isn't determined by loud voices or careless words. Vanessa, meanwhile, retreated from the spotlight with a speed that spoke volumes. Friends whispered about canceled events and sudden travel plans, though a few brave souls admitted she'd been asking about me, about how I'd known the bracelet's worth. I never answered. Instead, I poured my energy into launching Hayes Curations, the boutique consultancy I dreamed of but never dared to announce. The very appraisal report Vanessa mocked became the cornerstone of my first marketing campaign, Discover Hidden Worth. Investors who once overlooked me now lined up for meetings. Journalists framed my story as a modern fable of quiet revenge and unexpected triumph. Yet my satisfaction didn't come from the headlines or the surge of clients. It came late at night, when I'd brew tea and replay the party in my mind. Not the insult, but the lesson it sparked. I thought of my grandmother's knowing smile the day she'd slipped the bracelet into my hands, her soft warning that true value waits for the right eyes. She must have known I'd need that reminder someday. When Vanessa finally sent a carefully worded message, half apology, half plea for a private meeting, I stared at it for a long while before simply deleting it. Some conversations are best left unanswered. Instead, I planned a small gathering for my closest circle, the people who'd stood by me when my worth was still a question mark. That evening, as laughter filled my living room and the bracelet caught the soft glow of candlelight, I raised a glass and finally put words to the quiet victory I'd been carrying. To hidden treasures, I said, and to the courage it takes to recognize them, even when others can't. My friends clinked glasses, their smiles warm and knowing. Outside, the city pulsed with the rhythm of 100 unseen stories, each one carrying its own secret sparkle. As I looked around the room, I realized the greatest transformation wasn't in Vanessa's humiliation or the bracelet's value. It was in me. I no longer needed anyone to tell me I was enough. I had appraised myself, and the verdict was priceless. Weeks turned into months, and the storm of public fascination began to quiet, leaving behind something steadier and far more meaningful, a legacy I could finally call my own. The bracelet, now insured and documented with its full history, became the emblem of Hayes Curations, featured in our logo as a tiny gleaming arc of silver. Each time a client brought me an heirloom or forgotten piece of art, I felt a spark of the same thrill I'd experienced when the appraisal report first revealed my grandmother's secret. Every evaluation wasn't just about numbers or rarity. It was about untangling stories of resilience, love, and hidden worth. The business grew faster than I dared to dream, attracting partnerships with museums and private collectors who appreciated my quiet confidence and sharp eye. But amid the excitement, I found myself drawn back to the memory of my grandmother, the woman whose wisdom had set all of this in motion. On a crisp autumn morning, I visited her grave, the bracelet clasped securely around my wrist. Kneeling beside the stone, I whispered my gratitude for the gift, for the lesson, and for the strength to rise above cheap words. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, wrapping me in a gentle hush that felt like her embrace. In that silence, I understood that this journey was never just about proving Vanessa wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was never defined by anyone's careless judgment. Later that evening, as the city lights shimmered beyond my office window, I drafted a letter to my future self, a tradition my grandmother once taught me. Remember, I wrote, true value lives in the story, not the price. Never forget where you began or who believed in you first. I sealed the letter in a small box alongside a copy of the appraisal report and a photo of my grandmother smiling in her favorite sun hat. One day I would pass it down, just as she had the bracelet to me. When I finally set the box on my shelf, I felt a calm sense of completion. Vanessa's name barely crossed my mind anymore. Her insult had been reduced to a mere footnote in a much grander narrative. My worth, once questioned and mocked, now echoed through every client meeting, every appraisal certificate, every late night brainstorming session for the company I had built from quiet determination. The bracelet glinted softly under the warm lamplight, no longer just a piece of jewelry, but a lighthouse, guiding me, reminding me, and standing as proof that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's simply living beautifully, fully aware of your own priceless truth. A full year passed before I truly grasped the depth of what had unfolded. The noise of viral headlines had faded, the sudden invitations had slowed, and life settled into a rhythm that felt less like a victory lap and more like a quiet coronation. My company thrived, not because of the bracelet's fame, but because people trusted the woman behind it. Clients came seeking not just appraisals, but the confidence to believe in their own hidden treasures. At night, when the office lights dimmed and the city softened into a hum, I would sometimes take the bracelet from its case and slip it onto my wrist. Its cool weight was no longer a reminder of Vanessa's insult. It was a promise I'd made to myself. I thought of all the moments in my life when I'd been underestimated, the internships I was passed over for, the relationships that wilted when I refused to shrink, the countless times I'd been told to be realistic. Each memory no longer stung. They gleamed like facets of a jewel, proof that the world's doubts had only sharpened my shine. Vanessa remained a ghost in the narrative, her presence reduced to whispers at occasional social events. Friends told me she had moved to another city, chasing a fresh start, but I felt no urge to follow her story. My revenge was never about destruction. It was about transformation, and transformation leaves no room for gloating. On the anniversary of the gala, I hosted a small dinner for the people who mattered most. My parents, a few close friends, and the mentors who had quietly believed in me from the start. As we shared a toast, I noticed my parents' eyes lingering on the bracelet, not with the hunger of appraisal, but with pride. My father, once hesitant about my career path, squeezed my hand and whispered, "You were never useless, Clara. We just didn't know how bright you'd shine." His words settled over me like a final, gentle benediction. In that moment, I realized the true victory was not the bracelet's value, the vile story, or the company I had built. It was the quiet certainty that I no longer needed validation from anyone. The crown I wore wasn't made of jewels or headlines. It was forged in self-worth, sealed in resilience, and polished by every doubt I had ever turned into fuel. As the candles flickered low and laughter warmed the room, I felt my grandmother's presence in the soft shimmer of the bracelet. Her lesson had carried me here, to a life richer than even she could have predicted. I raised my glass one final time and said only 4 words, simple and complete: to value beyond measure. And for the first time in my life, the world and my own heart echoed back in perfect agreement. Time has a way of sanding the sharp edges of memory, leaving behind only the shine. Years later, when people mention the night my cheap gift stunned an entire ballroom, I no longer feel the flicker of anger or the rush of vindication that wants to find the story. Instead, I feel gratitude for the insults that woke me, for the bracelet that revealed itself as a quiet fortune, and for the strength it took to turn humiliation into triumph. Hayes Curations has grown into an international name with a team that now spans continents and a roster of clients who trust me not just with their valuables, but with the hidden histories those items carry. Every appraisal reminds me of that first lesson. True worth cannot be shouted down, only uncovered. I keep my grandmother's bracelet in a specially lit alcove of our flagship office, not as a trophy, but as a beacon. Visitors often pause before it, drawn to its subtle sparkle, and I watch their eyes soften when they read the small inscription on the plaque below. Value waits for the right eyes. That single line, my grandmother's wisdom, has become the heart of my work. the philosophy behind every consultation and every quiet victory that never makes the headlines. My parents now attend every major event, standing at my side not as skeptics, but as my proudest supporters. Their early doubts have transformed into an unspoken apology, one I've long since accepted and forgiven. And as for Vanessa, her name surfaces only as a faint ripple in distant conversations. I neither seek her out nor shut the door entirely. Her role in my story is complete, a faded photograph and an album I no longer need to open. On quiet evenings, after the last client has left and the city lights paint silver streaks across my office floor, I sometimes slip the bracelet onto my wrist and look out over the skyline. In those moments, I don't see a piece of jewelry or a symbol of revenge. I see a lineage of love, a spark of self-belief, and a reminder that worth is never about price tags or applause. It's in the courage to stand, to wait, and to reveal your shine when the world least expects it. I breathe deeply, the cool metal resting against my skin like a steady heartbeat, and whisper a silent thank you to the woman who started it all. My grandmother's voice, though long gone, still echoes in the quiet. Never forget, Clara, true value lives in the story, not the price. And as the city hums beneath me, I know with absolute certainty that the story isn't over. It's simply become priceless. And so, the chapter of the bracelet closes, not with the bang of revenge, but with the quiet grace of understanding. What began as a birthday insult became a journey far greater than I could have imagined. Vanessa's laughter, once sharp enough to cut, now feels like a distant echo, one that pushed me toward a life I might never have dared to claim. My grandmother's bracelet no longer sits heavy with memories of humiliation. It rests as a gentle reminder of love, legacy, and the strength that comes from knowing your own worth. I built a company, yes. I proved every doubter wrong. But the true victory was never in wealth or headlines. It was in the moment I no longer needed validation from anyone. My parents' pride, my team's loyalty, the quiet trust of every client who places a treasure in my hands, these are the riches that cannot be appraised. Tonight, as I lock the office and step into the cool night air, the city sparkles beneath the stars. I touch the bracelet one last time before tucking it safely away, feeling its steady weight like the heartbeat of a story complete. I smile, not for cameras, not for applause, but for the woman I have become. Value, I've learned, isn't something you wait for others to give. It's something you decide to see in yourself. And in that choice, I am, and always will be, priceless.